Hey everybody, how's it going? Misty, good to see you. Jimmy, hope you're doing okay. Susan, glad you're with us. Cheryl is with us as well. Cynthia says she's been exposed to COVID-19 and she's self-isolating. Certainly be in our prayers. Hope that you don't catch it. Evelyn, good to see you. Jeff and Jill went up the hill. Not quite how that goes. Good to see you. Cynthia, I have not been exposed to COVID-19. I self-isolate all the time, so. Dorothy, good to see you. So what's going on this evening, everyone? All that's going on. Crazy. All right, it's 7:05. We'll get started here in 5 minutes. Hopefully we have several more people. That's what happens when you get in a habit of starting late, is people come late. But I actually like this time before we get going just to visit a little bit. But we are low on numbers. Thought I had YouTube up, but I don't see it. There we are. Illinois is leading Minnesota 45-30. Jeff says on YouTube. Allergies are kind of bad. I've had a really good cedar season for some reason this year, but I am sniffing and blowing my nose a lot lately. So weird though. We usually have like 13, 14, 15 people on Facebook and anywhere from like 4 to 7 on YouTube. And right now there's nobody on YouTube and it says 5 on Facebook. But there's more than 5 people in chat. So I don't know, maybe it's not reporting correctly. Misty, Jimmy, Susan, Cheryl, Cynthia, Evelyn, Jeff and Jill, Dorothy. That's 8. Unless somebody left. Whatever. I'm not a numbers guy. Right, sweetie? She rolled her eyes at me. Not sure exactly what that means. We are going to have a short night tonight. And I know I say that a lot, but we really are going to have a short night tonight. I almost thought about canceling it, but I did not want to lose our momentum. So instead, we're going to have a short time. We're just going to look at the first part of, well, I guess not the first part, the last part of chapter 25. Yeah, the middle part of chapter 25. I don't want to get into Esau selling his birthright to Jacob yet, because that's a small patch of scripture, but it has enormous implications for understanding the story and what would you call this story? The whole story is a metaphor. It's not allegorical because that has to have, you know what? It's almost allegorical. Anyway, Sue from St. Joe Mo, glad to have you. It's 7:10. We are going to get started. So we are in Genesis 25. And just to remind you of where we came from, the last thing that we talked about was the death of Abraham. And there was a lot about Ishmael. And one of the themes that we have seen throughout Genesis so far are parallel storylines where the summary, the plot of one story is the same as the plot or summary of another story in the same book. So we're going to have a little bit of that now, and it almost seems like that's we're not going to hear any more about Ishmael. So I think that there's a parallel between Isaac and Ishmael and then Esau and Jacob, and we'll see that a little bit tonight. And probably that's all we're ever going to see is a little bit. It's just a hint at it. But if you remember in the story, Abraham seemed to love Ishmael. I wouldn't say more than Isaac. There's nothing to demonstrate that, but perhaps as much as Isaac. He was his son. He was his first son. So it is possible that as the firstborn, he was the favorite. It's hard to say. Maybe that's part of what drove, if we want to read into the story a little bit or try to draw out of the story, maybe that's what made Sarah really disapproving of the relationship between Abraham and Ishmael, was that he tended to favor Ishmael and she couldn't stand that. That's not in the scripture. I'm just saying maybe that's part of it. So keep that tension between, although Ishmael and, I guess the difference here is that Ishmael and Isaac themselves seem to have had no tension between each other. They seem to get along. They played together as children, and then they reunited when Abraham died. Julius, dude, what are you doing, man? What? Yeah, there you go. Julius has this thing now where he sits on Cheryl's lap and puts his legs up on her desk and just stands there and looks at the monitor. He was just looking at me. Maybe he wanted a Bible study. I don't know. Okay, so keep that sort of in the back of your mind as we continue on. So the last thing that we read about was the death of Ishmael. So we read about the death of Abraham and then the death of Ishmael. And so all that's left now is Isaac. And going forward, all that's important is the line that is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you'll hear those three mentioned all the time. Ishmael is not mentioned, not in Christianity anyway. And Esau is not mentioned unless it's directly talking about his relationship with Isaac and Jacob. So it's really, you know, you'll hear the phrase the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the line that that has the center focus in this story. So we are going to start at Genesis 25:19. And what we have is a recapitulation. Now we've just talked about Abraham and Isaac and Isaac getting married and Abraham giving everything he had to Isaac. We've just talked about all that. And yet at verse 19, we have a recapitulation of that story, a retelling of that story. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. So they're reminding us that Isaac is Abraham's son, even though we just heard it. Now, the point I'm bringing is that we likely, this is indicative of having a new author. Several authors contributed, as well as editors, contributed to the book that is Genesis. This story, the whole story of Jacob, in fact, is thought to have been stitched together from at least three primary authors and then a couple of editors who put the story together. Not that that's important, not that it informs anything or changes anything, but as long as we're studying the literature of it, I think it's interesting to note when we have sort of an author change. So these are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. So those relationships mean nothing to us. We don't know any of those places or any of those people, but the early Israelites presumably did, or they wouldn't be in this story. Now here is a parallel that we have not been told about, and it's not they don't make a big deal out of it, although you would think that they would. And I'll kind of talk about this in just a minute. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. So remember I talked about parallels. So Isaac and his wife cannot have children, just like Abraham and Sarah, or in particular Abram and Sarai, before they received their new names, could not have children. Now this is a huge parallel that you think would be sort of a major part of this story. And in fact, this transition takes us basically from Abraham to Jacob and Esau, and Isaac plays only a peripheral role in the whole thing. So it's as if Isaac's only purpose in the book of Genesis is to be the bridge between Abraham, who we talked about for chapter after chapter after chapter, and Jacob, who is the future, and the past. He is the foundation of Israel. In fact, Jacob is Israel. Keep that phrase in mind as we go forward, more so past tonight, but tonight as well. But just keep in mind that Jacob is Israel. I said this story is allegorical is not right, but it's more than just metaphorical as well. It may very well be allegorical, to be honest. It depends. It really depends entirely on what the name Jacob means. And we don't know exactly, but there's a place a little bit later on where Esau is going to complain about Jacob stealing his birthright and stealing his blessing. Spoiler alert. And he says, of course he's named Jacob. He's supplanted me twice. So that tells us, even though we don't know this from any other context, that the name Jacob means something like supplant or perhaps even deceive, or I wonder, let me see if I can find some synonyms for supplant. Replace, displace, supersede, take the place of, undermine, override, oust, usurp, overthrow, remove, topple, unseat. I mean, these words all describe the future of Israel, right? I mean, they are constantly replaced and displaced and superseded and undermined and overridden and ousted and usurped. And the word overthrow especially makes me think of a book, a chapter in Hosea, where through Hosea, God talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, and I just had the word in the places in my mind. Zeboim, Edma and Zeboim. Admah and Zeboim. I was close. Admah and Zeboim aren't really mentioned in a whole lot, but they're very near Sodom and Gomorrah, and they suffered the same fate as Sodom and Gomorrah. And so God talks about how because Israel hasn't changed their way, because they're always doing all these wrong things and worshiping the false gods, that he's going to overthrow them. The word that he uses, it's translated as destroy, but it actually is more literally translated, and everywhere else it's in the Old Testament in Hebrew, it's translated as overthrow. He's going to overthrow them the way. Well, he says the way he destroyed Admah and Zeboim and Sodom and Gomorrah. And then later in that same chapter in Hosea, he says, "My heart has been overthrown." And there I forget the English translation. Maybe we'll do Hosea sometime. But basically, he says recoils, the word. My heart recoils. And it's his way of saying that his desire or his plan of destroying Israel recoils in his heart. It springs back. It's overthrown by this love that God has for Israel. So that word is sort of built into who Israel is. Now, we also don't know what the name Israel actually means. The best guess is to struggle or to wrestle, because that's what Israel does all the time. It struggles and wrestles. And what does Jacob do? I know we're not there yet, but you probably know the story. Jacob wrestles with an angel of God, but of course it's actually God, because every time in Genesis when it says an angel of God, it actually ends up being God in sort of human form. So Jacob wrestles with God, and so again, I just can't focus on this enough for you to understand this story, the story of Jacob. Jacob is Israel. And God says as much, though he doesn't give us specific details, okay? So Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her. So again, surprise, it's twins. And evidently, the way that they fought in her womb was enough that it actually made her not want to live. She was in such agony over this that she really couldn't stand it. Now, also, a little bit later, she says the same thing about the possibility of her son marrying a Hittite wife, that life's not worth living if it's that way. So maybe she's a little bit weak in her character to begin with. We'll flesh that out as we go on. But the next line says, the children struggled within her. I wish I knew enough of Hebrew to know. Yeah, I can't parse the verb. The children, I don't even see the verb struggle. That's so strange. Well, anyway, the children struggled together within her. They fought. And she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? And even that, I think what's going on here, and the reason I can't find the verb for struggled in the original Hebrew. There's a note here that says meaning of Hebrew uncertain, and you will see that sometimes. They just translate it the best that they can. But she does later say the same thing, if it has to be this way, or if it might be this way, what's the point of living? So she went to inquire of the Lord. So basically she probably went to a synagogue somewhere, or a temple. Would be a synagogue is probably anachronistic, but she went to a temple to ask of God. And this is what God said to her, okay? 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. So that's actually a little cryptic. Now, the elder shall serve the younger is perhaps less cryptic, because we will know which one is older once they're born and which one is younger. And of course, Esau is born first, and Jacob comes quick on his heel. That must be where that phrase comes from. I love the etymology of phrases. Quick on the heels. Where did the phrase quick on the heels come from? I think it came from this. Now, they're not going to admit it, but I think it came from this. On the heels of literally means following close behind or soon after someone or something. So stick with me. I'm small. Hang on a second. There we go. So back to this sort of cryptic, the commentary calls it sort of an oracle. Oracles often predicted the future in cryptic ways. 2 nations are in your womb. So again, for her, as the mother of twins gestating in her womb, calling them nations would be metaphorical. But I would make the argument that the entire story is metaphorical, and the nations are what are actually literal. But it's very possible it's both, and it doesn't make any difference. 2 nations are in your womb. So the 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. So that's essentially what happened with Isaac and Ishmael, right? They split off into 2 different nations, and we're seeing the one nation come down from Isaac, and Ishmael has the other part of the nation. And in fact, Ishmael is Abraham first, but then Ishmael is the secondary sort of founding father figure of the Muslim faith, as far as I understand it. So we have something kind of similar here. The part that's cryptic is the one shall be stronger than the other. That it doesn't say which one is stronger than the other, and it doesn't say what is meant by stronger. So as we will see here in a very short bit, the next time we meet together, Esau is the stronger physically, but Jacob is the stronger mentally. Esau is very weak-minded. Perhaps like his mother. We'll talk more about that too. Jacob is for sure the weaker person. He just kind of sits around and thinks a lot, which, I mean, I'm all for that. Esau is the man of the land, out doing stuff. So anyway, I will tell you now, we will never know what exactly is prophesied by the one shall be stronger than the other than there is a disparity between the 2. They are not the same. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. Well, we We knew that, right? The first came out all red, all his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. And typically in the Bible, there would be a note here that would say what Esau meant. So this is a little confusing as well, because Esau is not really the name that he seems to be known by in terms of, that's how we know him. Stick with me. Basically, Esau means hairy. Okay, that's just what it is. So the first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Hairy. Okay, just like I call Peter Rocky because he's named after a rock. So anyway, they called him Esau. Later, we are going to read, I'm just going to skip ahead. We're not going to talk about this tonight, but I want you to know this as well. Jacob was cooking a stew. Esau came in from the field and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I'm famished." Therefore, he was called Edom. And Edom, and there is a footnote in the Bibles there that will say Edom means red. So they actually called him Red. So his name is Harry, but they call him Red. His name is Esau, but they called him Edom. This is important because it tells us who the two nations are. As I told you, Jacob is Israel, and Esau represents the Edomites. And they are going to be two nations at war with each other. But we'll get to that. I just wanted to sort of let you in on the what was going to happen. A little teaser, I guess. Okay, so the first came out red, his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau, meaning hairy. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, right? That's why I think on the heels of. How does that not come from this? I think it comes from this. But anyway, he's gripping Esau's heel. And so they named him Jacob. And so here, the Bible says that Jacob means he takes by the heel or he supplants. That's what the NRSV says anyway. And that is just a wild guess. There is no... It's just strange to me that Jacob gets the footnote explaining what Jacob means when they're 100% using the same context that we have. But on Esau, in the NRSV at least, there's no footnote, even though it just said he's hairy, so they named him Esau. I don't know. So it says Jacob means he takes by the heel or he supplants. So the only reason that they say that is because he came out grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. So maybe Jacob means grasping the heel. That's what they're saying. Later, again, like I said, Esau is going to say, of course his name is Jacob. He has supplanted me twice. So there, then it might mean that he supplants. So the important thing to understand here is that Jacob has no meaning. It's a name that doesn't mean anything that we know of. It obviously did have a meaning back at the time, but the translators who are telling us what Jacob means are looking at the same context that we can look at ourselves. And again, Jacob is Israel. And what Jacob does, really, his whole life is wrestle. He does it mentally, he does it spiritually, he does it physically with God. And Israel possibly means wrestles with God. But Jacob is Israel. As we read the story, you need to understand that Jacob is Israel. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah bore them. And of course, she's 40 at this time, they say. If you use my rule of 1/2, you could imagine Isaac as about a 30-year-old and Rebecca as about a 20-year-old, which to me seems like they were kind of giving up a little too soon on thinking they were barren. But anyway, that rule of half doesn't. That was just kind of a way of understanding probably a accurate or a equivalent age of Rebecca, Abraham and Sarah. Okay, the last part we're going to read tonight. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. So Esau lived outside. He a man of the field. He camped everywhere. He killed wild game. He is obviously the stronger physically, but Jacob is stronger, as I said, mentally, spiritually. I don't know about spiritually. I'll rescind that. He's the smarter of the two. He's stronger mentally. And now here is the last part that I think deserves some thought. Verse 28. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So if you take that literally, it certainly makes it seem like Isaac only loves Esau and Rebekah only loves Jacob. And that's not very realistic of families, really. But again, metaphorically, what we have are two children, two nations vying for the attention and love of their parents. We'll talk more about that metaphor as we get into it. And we don't have to look at it only metaphorically. It's perfectly fine to look at this as a literal story about humans who lived. And it may very well be exactly that as well, but it is definitely also metaphorical. So Isaac loved Esau just because he loved game. He loved meat. The guy loved meat, and Esau went out and got meat, and so he loved meat. Jacob was a vegan or something. I don't know. No, he wasn't, because he was making stew, right? And he had his mother's love. And so these two, Esau and Jacob, will always be fighting, as they fought in the womb, as they fought coming out of the womb, right? Jacob was grabbing a hold of his heel, trying to get out first, clamber over him, and just didn't get it done. They will continue to fight, and we will see that as we move on. But I promised it would be a short night, and it is a short night. It's 7:35, and we are done. So I hope you liked this part of the story. Next week, we'll be getting into Esau selling his birthright, which is so important. And then Abimelech is going to come back in our story. You remember Abimelech had a relationship with Abraham? He's going to come back. I got to tell you, in Genesis 26:6, this is a couple of sessions in the future. Here's what we read. Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, guess what he said? You'll never guess. Guess what he told them? You won't get it. He said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking, or else the men of the place might kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she is attractive in appearance. Parallels. Like father, like son. The sins of the father are visited upon generation after generation. The story repeats. So while this is the story of the Israelites, this is our story as well, because it has repeated to those of us who have followed in the footsteps of our spiritual ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right. Thanks for being here tonight. Invite friends to come next time. We want to get back to when we had 15, 16, 20 people watching, just because this is good stuff. And we're getting into like the really good part of the story. Like, we've laid down so much foundation that we're going to be able to move a little bit faster and just really, really enjoy this and and enjoy it with the intensity of the first Israelites who sat around the fireplace, the campfire, listening to these stories so many years ago. All right. Oh yeah, I'm not. It's okay, Susan. I'm not worried about the who's here. I'm glad you are here. I just I love this study, and I like having uh, just the input and the energy from some of the people that are missing. But I'm very don't think me ungrateful that you all are here. Very glad that you're with us tonight. All right, that's it, everybody. So we will be back next week. I'm actually taking a week of vacation, but that would be the 18th. I think I'm likely to stream that night, even though it's vacation. I'm not actually going anywhere, so probably no foreseeable breaks for a while. So we'll just plan on meeting every Tuesday. I don't want to take a break so soon after just getting going again. So, all right, that is it for tonight. You all are very welcome. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. Keep Dorothy in your prayers, especially tomorrow as we have the memorial service, the celebration of life for Jack. Keep your church in your prayers as we figure out how to navigate around some of our challenges, financial and otherwise. And keep one another in prayer as we do as the body of Christ. So God bless, Godspeed, and as always, thanks for watching.